Yo, what's going on? This is Mike. If you're new to this channel, I film all kinds of visual content. So if you're into video production or content creation, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You will not regret it. So what am I talking about? This will be the ultimate guide on how to shoot and edit in slow motion. There's been so much confusion about filming and editing in slow motion. At least for me, when I was researching it, it was all at different places. No one could actually give me the right answers. So you're gonna find all of your answers in this video. That is my goal to do this. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how to film, because filming is only half the battle. The other half is when you're editing. So I'm gonna show you how to film, the correct camera settings that you need to be in, and how you're gonna edit it. And there are two ways that I'm gonna show you on how to edit slow motion footage. And I'm gonna show you a formula, so you can use this formula so you can always capture great slow motion footage. It's gonna help you with your shooting and it's gonna help you with your editing. So with this video, you will have the best slow motion footage every single time. So when do you use slow motion? You can use slow motion on fast action type sequences. Someone's moving really fast. It works really well for that. Also works on steadying out some of your handheld shots. You know, it works well for like highlight sequences or recap videos of something. You don't have a gimbal, you don't have any type of steady cam or stabilizer, and you're going handheld, it's gonna help steady out those shots. Also good for even doing product shots. It's like a still product that can't move, but you're moving the camera around the product, and shooting in slow motion will help make it look super epic. Like if you were to shoot this bottle and you're moving the camera around the bottle, you're gonna get an epic shot. Let's talk about camera settings. The standard for what we're shooting on is 24 frames per second. You're gonna shoot everything at 24 frames per second. We work in a 24 frames per second timeline. That's generally what we work in. Or you might see 23.976, but you might just see 24 frames per second in your camera or on your editing software. They're synonymous. Why do we shoot in 24 frames per second? Well, it's just something that we've adopted. Almost every film that you're watching now is shot in 24 frames per second, unless you're going for a stylized look. What looks most natural to us is in 24 frames. And even before that, when they shot on film, when they had to sync up audio, it sounded most natural at 24 frames per second. When it was faster than 24, around 60, it just sounded weird, and then slower, then it obviously sounded weird. So 24 just seemed to work, and then we've adopted that till today. But you can obviously shoot outside of those guidelines if you're going for a stylized look. The only time you're not shooting at 24 frames per second is, let's say you're in a different country and your standard is 25. That's the standard there, but when you're shooting in slow motion, the formula is the same. So now the other thing we need to talk about is your shutter speed. The general rule is your shutter speed will be double the amount of your frames per second. So if you're shooting 24 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be at 1/48th of a second. 24, 48. It's double what your frames per second is, well, that number at least. So 24 frames per second, then you're shooting at 1/48th of a second, or something that's closest. So if your camera doesn't have 1/48th of a second, it might be 1/50th of a second. Use that, it's close, it still looks great. So if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, then your shutter speed needs to be at 1/120th of a second. If you're shooting at 120 frames per second, then your shutter speed needs to be at 1/240th of a second, just doubling what your frames per second is. It's the most natural look. If you're shooting outside of those parameters, then you're going for a stylized look. And I'll show you that later in the test footage. Now, if you're working with a cinema camera that doesn't have shutter speed in the camera settings, you'll most likely see shutter angle. And the degree angle you'll see is 180 degrees. 180 degrees is just the standard for getting the most natural look from your camera. So now when you're shooting at 180 degrees, you do not change that degree angle. Leave it at 180 degrees. So if you're shooting 24 frames per second, leave it at 180. 60 frames per second, leave it at 180 degrees. 120 frames per second, leave it at 180 degrees. If you go above or below, you're going for a stylized look. Now, I can't show you that because I don't have a camera with me that shoots in shutter angle, but the shutter speed differences on a regular DSLR camera will have the same effect. Now, one thing that you need to know, once you're bumping up your shutter speed, you're gonna lose a lot of light. So you either need to bump up your ISO reasonably so that you're not getting too much noise in your shot, and to avoid the noise coming into your shot, then you have to bring the ISO back down and bring extra light into your shot. Because the higher your shutter speed, then the darker the image, as well as your frames per second. So I'm gonna shoot a couple things. I'm gonna shoot it at 120 frames per second, and I'm gonna shoot at the correct shutter speed, as well as shooting faster shutter speed and a slower shutter speed, so you can see the difference and the style that it creates. All right, let's do it. All right, now I'm in Premiere and I'm gonna show you the 2 ways to edit your footage in slow motion. First thing you wanna do is to make sure your sequence settings is set to 23.976. If you're working in a different country, then change it to 25. Whatever your standard is, change it to that frames per second. I'm gonna be editing in 23.976, so that's what I have selected. 1920 by 1080, that's totally fine. And I'm gonna press OK. So I'm gonna work in the 23.976 frames per second timeline. Now I already dropped the clips into this bin of different footage that I shot, and I'm gonna show you all of them. The first way to edit your slow motion footage is to interpret your footage. The second way is to adjust your clip speed and duration. I'm gonna show you both ways. What I'm gonna do right now is you don't need to do this if you're editing your slow motion footage. I'm just gonna do this to show you the 2 different ways. I'm just gonna duplicate these clips. This clip and this clip are the exact same thing. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit this clip and I'm gonna play it back for you, and it's gonna play in regular speed, 120 frames per second. So I just threw water on the lemon. Boom. Super simple. The first way I'm gonna do it is to right click the clip, modify, interpret footage. And I'm gonna assume the frame rate to be 23.976. And you can see here, it went from 120 frames to 24 frames. This was the original, and I just changed, and I just assumed this frame rate to be 23.976. So when I play this clip now, it's actually gonna be in slow motion. So when I play it back, slow motion right there, okay? So that's the first way to do it. I'm gonna actually create my in and out points, and I can drag this into the timeline, and it's gonna play it back in slow motion. There it is. Now, the second way to do it is to not interpret your footage. You could drag your 120 frames per second clip into the timeline. And when you drag it in, here, let me just delete the audio. When I drag this in, it's gonna play back regular speed, okay? But you don't want that, you wanna edit in slow motion. I'm gonna create my in and out points. Or in and out, but just delete. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna use this formula. Formula is gonna come up on the screen. This is how you should adjust your speed, clip, and duration. Right click your clip, speed, duration. Or you could do Command R, it does the exact same thing. So speed right here, because I shot at 120 frames per second, you're gonna do 24 divided by 120, it's gonna give you 0.2 or 20%. Change that to 20%, okay, and it's gonna play it in slow motion. There it is. The exact same thing as the original. Boom. So the first way was to interpret your footage to 23.976 and drag it in. The second way is just to drag in the clip into the sequence and right click, speed, duration, and adjust your speed. Now, why would you prefer one way over the other? Sometimes if let's say you're editing a music video and you want the lyrics that the artist is singing to match up with the song, then you just wanna drag it into your clip and then adjust the speed later. Whereas if you were to assume the frame rate, you're gonna bring it in and then it's gonna play back in slow motion. You don't wanna do that. You wanna bring it in first and then adjust the speed later. It all depends on what you're editing. So those are the 2 different ways to do it. Now, this is correct shutter speed. I shot this at 120 frames per second. The shutter speed that I used was 1/250. Now, technically it's supposed to be 1/240, but on my camera, the closest one was 1/250, so that's why I used that. Now, these other 2 clips here, I'm gonna bring this in. These 2 clips in. The first one I shot at 1/125. Okay, there's it. There's that. And then this one, I set the shutter speed to 1/500. I'm gonna show you what happens when you do that. I'm gonna take off the audio. So I'm gonna interpret this footage, or I'm not gonna interpret it. So I'm going to adjust the speed clip to 20%, just like I did the other one, as well as this one to 20%. Now you're gonna see what the issue is. So the first one at 1/125, slow motion looks like this. Wow. There it is. Let me play that back one more time for you. Okay, now this one is gonna be 1/500. All right, so I'm gonna play back all three so you can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, so I'm gonna play back all three. This is the correct shutter speed, slower shutter speed, faster shutter speed. So you can see that they all gave 3 different effects. This one is more realistic. This one, it's hard to tell with this, but it does have like a blur effect on it. And the last one makes it super crisp. Everything's super crispy, which for this commercial, or for this shot, actually looks pretty good. Original, slow, and fast. So it all depends what you're going for. All right, I'm gonna do the exact same thing for this. I'm gonna speed this up so you don't have to keep watching me do this. Okay, I'm gonna show you me shuffling some cards, okay? So I did 2 different things. So this was at the correct shutter speed at 250. This one is at 1/125. And then this one is 1/1000 actually. Okay, so you can kind of see that it kind of played back differently as well. Okay, so I'm going to adjust the clip duration to 20. Okay, now I just adjusted the clip speed duration to 20%. So this is the first take with correct shutter speed. In slow motion. Cool. This is the one with the slower shutter speed at 1/125. This one has a little bit of a blurrish look. And this is 1/1000. Has a crisper look. So 1/1000 has a crisper look. 1/125 has a blurrish look. And 1/250 is just average, normal. So it all depends what you're going for. Do you want to have this dreamy effect, or do you want to have a crispy effect? So those are the 3 different looks into the different shutter speeds, okay? So doubling it is the safest way to go. The reason I'm showing you this is because now you know, going ahead of time, what style do you want to achieve? Do you want just a normal slow motion footage? Do you want it to look blurry and have a dreamy effect? Or do you want it to look crisp, kind of give it like some hyper realistic feel? And there you go. So I hope this helped you understand how to shoot and edit in slow motion. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. Also, let me know if this video actually helped you out. I want to hear your feedback. I want to know if this helped you, or if you felt like I didn't explain it well enough. I hope this was the all-inclusive ultimate guide into shooting and editing in slow motion. There's been so much information just scattered everywhere. Hopefully this was all put into one video and it helped you understand. So anyway, let me know if this helped you out, and I'll catch you on the next video. Deuces.